Hello, welcome to Tops and Flops, where I pick a director and I watch their best, worst, and most mid-rated film. This time, I'm going to be talking about Ang Lee. I like to do this because I think sometimes when we think about directors or we talk about directors, we tend to focus on their best works. While it would be nice if we were all just the sum of our greatest works and our masterpieces, that's not really how life works. We are the sum of all of our parts, not just our best parts. So our bad decisions and our mistakes and our weird, wayward paths and questionable choices all play a factor in who we are. And I think that's super true of directors. Yes, there's their greatest hits, but they also sometimes make flops or they take on weird movies that make you question why they did that. I think all of that is part of understanding the director as a whole. So I decided to do this first with Ang Lee because when I was looking at his list of filmography, I didn't feel like I could really identify a through line. I couldn't figure out what made Ang Lee Ang Lee. Why did he pick the movies that he did? What makes them similar? So I thought this was a great way to dive into it and figure out the DNA of Ang Lee through the best, the worst, and the most medium, meh film that he's ever made. So to choose the movies that I was going to watch, I used Rotten Tomatoes Critic Score, which of course is not the end-all be-all rating of any movie, but it's an easy metric to use. So Ang Lee's top movie actually got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's called Pushing Hands, and it's the first movie that he ever made. As an honorable mention, I also watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I made a mistake when I was looking through the reviews and I thought that this one was the top, so I watched it anyway. It's his second most highly rated movie, and I'm going to talk about it because I thought it was great and it's really representative of his style. His worst rated movie was Gemini Man, which is the movie where they clone Will Smith into a younger version of himself. It got 28% from critics, but interestingly, it got 83% from the audience, which is a huge audience critic gap, which I think makes it interesting, and I was excited to watch that one. For his most mid-rated film, statistics majors would have told me to use the median, and I tried, but there were two medians that were equal, and I had already watched an extra movie for his top-rated film, and I didn't really want to watch two more. So instead, I took the mean, and I rounded it to the nearest rating score, which was 74%, which was a movie called Lust, Caution, and it's an espionage thriller. I won't be getting into spoilers in any of these films. A lot of them I would recommend people watch, and so I don't want to ruin them for anybody. Let's start with Ang Lee's top-rated film, Pushing Hands. As I mentioned, this was Ang Lee's debut film. Ang Lee submitted this script to a Taiwanese scriptwriting competition, and it won first place. And so then he went on to make the movie about it. And fun fact, the second place winner was also Ang Lee. It was The Wedding Banquet, and he also made that one into a full-length movie. Pushing Hands is a Taiwanese movie about a Chinese Tai Chi master, Mr. Chu, who comes to live with his son Alex in the States. There's a huge clash of cultures between Mr. Chu and Alex's wife, Martha. The movie really explores the discomfort of culture shock and the struggles of cross-cultural interaction. Mr. Chu also struggles to find his place in the world as an aging man in a culture that doesn't respect the elderly as much as what he's used to. The film explores cross-cultural conflict, familial roles, tradition, and finding a place in the world as you age. One thing I noticed right off the bat about this movie is that it communicates so much outside of the dialogue. For example, the entire intro sequence is super expositional and sets the stage for Mr. Chu's relationship with Martha, and particularly the rift between the two and the extreme contrast at which they live their lives. In this sequence, the first line doesn't come until about 7 minutes and 40 seconds into the movie, but we learn so much before then. So these contrast shots that show the difference between the two cultures continue really beautifully throughout the movie. We see things that are super obvious, like the different types of food that they eat, or even the utensils with which they eat them. We see that he practices Tai Chi and she goes on runs. Mr. Chu meditates and is very orderly and deliberate and precise, while Martha tends to be a bit more haphazard. She gets stressed and frazzled, and she's a bit more of just a chaotic character in comparison to Mr. Chu. I think they even took this down to the way that they did her hair and her makeup and her outfit. I was wondering why they had her hair this way. Like, it was just very big and kind of frizzy. Not that I'm one to talk, but as I watched on and I thought about it, I realized it's such a high contrast to the precision and the orderly nature of Mr. Chu. A few other stylistic things that stood out to me in this movie were the choreography and just the blocking and the action. It felt super deliberate and controlled, and not just when Mr. Chu was doing Tai Chi. Throughout the movie, the motions, the hand gestures, movement, and placing felt very deliberate and very telling. And more specifically, I noticed a huge focus on hands, which makes sense because this movie is called Pushing Hands. But I actually noticed this in the other Ang Lee movies as well. He's very deliberate with hand movements. Hands are very expressive. They're a huge component of body language, and like 80% of what we communicate is through body language. So those were the things that I really enjoyed about this movie, and I genuinely liked it. But the idea that it got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes makes me pause a little bit. It was really good. Didn't feel like 100 to me. Let's get into the few issues that I found. First, the pacing felt very slow. It's hard for me to say whether this is just a symptom of being a 90s movie or a problem with the movie. It didn't feel like there were scenes that didn't need to be there, but it really took its time. It was definitely a slow build without a lot of roller coaster moments. And this could just be more of a me thing where I grew up watching faster paced movies. However, my bigger complaint is the way that they handled Martha's character. So Mr. Chu is the main character of this movie, and we dive into his arc very fully, and the movie develops a ton of empathy for him as he goes through this process of adjusting to an entirely new life and dealing with the idea that he isn't valued here the way that he's used to being valued. He used to be a Tai Chi master. Now he's an old person in America, which is not really a place that's known for treating its elderly particularly well. He's kind of butting into this life that already existed without him, so he's new, he's unfamiliar, and none of his creature comforts are there. Culture shock is hard. Culture shock is hard when you move to a new state. He moved to an entirely new place where he doesn't speak the language, and he struggles with a lot of this. The movie does a great job of helping you develop empathy for him. But a big theme of this movie is cross-cultural conflict and coming together across cultures. In order to do that successfully, you have to develop empathy for both sides of the culture rift. So Ang Lee developed empathy for Mr. Chu really well, but I felt that this was lacking with Martha. She is the one who doesn't want Mr. Chu living there. It's really hard for her to adjust having him there. She's a writer who works from home, and he's in her space doing weird stuff that she's not used to, and she wants him gone. But they kind of villainize her with this, and I just don't feel like that sits with the theme of the movie of culture conflict being hard for everybody. I feel like they make her a little too mean without giving enough justification for why she's so frustrated with him. And if this was gonna be a one-sided story where Mr. Chu comes to America and his son's wife is mean and she just sucks, that could work. That's a story that you can do. But because this felt like it was trying to be an exploration of cross-cultural communication and relationships, I feel like she needed to be developed more. They justify her frustration a little bit, but it's always with little petty things like he's singing too loudly or he's doing Tai Chi in the other room and moving the furniture around, versus he feels frustrated that she doesn't value him as a person. Like, it doesn't feel like they're on the same playing field. I just feel like Martha's side of the story was a little bit thin. I don't feel like they gave her enough justification to be as unyielding as she was. I also struggled to find Alex and Martha's relationship believable. I don't really feel like they built up a ton of chemistry there. Because there was this big rift between Martha and the father, I think their relationship needed some chemistry there for us to really see why he was hanging on to this relationship at all, where his wife doesn't really like his father. They say, "I love you" sometimes, but it felt very telling, not showing. This could be a product of Alex's performance. I think the actor is a native speaker of Chinese rather than English, and that kind of came across in his delivery, which sometimes felt a little off. Either way, I still thought this was a really great movie. I think there was room for improvement. I'm a little curious about the 100% because that's like so high. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm being too harsh. I still thought it was good, just not perfect. Ang Lee's second highest rated film, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is a romantic adventure movie about a stolen legendary sword. It follows a master swordsman, a skilled warrior, and a runaway aristocrat through chases, duels, and secret alliances in an effort to retrieve the sword. This movie was actually based on a wuxia novel that was written in the 40s. Wuxia is a genre of Chinese fiction that focuses on martial arts heroes, usually in ancient or medieval China. But this film pulls inspiration from so many places. Michelle Yeoh, the star of the film, said that Ang Lee originally approached her about doing this movie by calling it Sense and Sensibility with martial arts. As background, Sense and Sensibility is a movie that he had directed a few years prior. This movie is probably best known for its fight scenes. They're super unique, and if there's one thing that you remember about them or that you've heard about them, it's that they kind of fly through the air. They defy gravity in a sense, and for a while I was waiting for them to explain how they're doing that, and they don't explain it. It's just part of the world and you accept it. But I did read that Ang Lee took inspiration from the way that people move in Chinese opera, and it just adds this really beautiful element to this already super beautiful fight choreography. So as I mentioned, Ang Lee is big with choreography, and if there's one movie you want to see where he does great choreography, it's obviously this one. Fun fact, these fights were choreographed by Yen Wu Ping, who also did Kill Bill and The Matrix. Ang Lee's direction to him was to make the fight scenes as communicative as possible. He wanted to make sure that the fights were functional elements of a story, a lot like the way musical numbers are in a musical, or at least a good musical. The songs in a musical shouldn't stop the plot, they should further the plot and actually add to the story or give you insight into the character's thoughts or feeling at the time. These fights did exactly that. They communicated so much other than just being a cool fight scene. Just like in Pushing Hands, every move speaks as clearly as a line of dialogue. This even continues outside of the fights. People can have whole conversations just through action. For example, take a look at this scene. Jen is hiding that she is a master swordsman, and at night she has stolen the sword, and she has actually fought with the other woman at the table, Yu Lian. Yu Lian knows this, but Jen doesn't know that she knows. Yu Lian outs her without letting anyone else at the table know by purposely dropping this mug, knowing that Jen will instinctively catch it in the air, which she does. So within a couple of seconds, no words exchanged, these women have just communicated that Yu Lian knows who Jen is, and Jen now knows that she knows. So cool. Just such cool stuff. So aside from the super unique fighting style, I think what I loved most about this movie was that Ang Lee combined these awesome fight scenes with really rich emotional storytelling and super great character arcs. And these are strong female characters. 3 of the 4 main warriors are women, and they don't make a huge deal out of it. It's not like a woman warrior, like what? A woman and a fighter? But she's hot. They just respect the women as good fighters. And you'll notice that they aren't overly sexualized or objectified. They don't dress in dumb bra armor or inappropriate costumes. They wear what people of the time would wear if they were fighters. While there are romantic storylines with these women, they're fully fleshed out on both sides. Both women have agency and arcs within these romantic storylines, which honestly, for a movie released in the 2000s, is pretty rare. If you look at other movies from the 2000s that have fighting women, they act so much different than this. They look very different than this. The things they wear are not like this. It's rare that they get a fully fleshed out storyline, especially one that doesn't revolve around a man. And I thought that this was such a refreshing difference. I love that they leaned into these strong, powerful women without making it all about the fact that they're making strong women. They didn't have to point and shout and be like, look at us, we're doing an empowered woman. They just did it, and it was awesome. Overall, I absolutely loved this movie. I thought it was so unique and creative and brave. Ang Lee has said that this was incredibly draining to make, especially physically. The amount of equipment it took to get them to do these flying fight scenes was immense. And he has said that while he was doing it, he didn't have a lot of faith in what he was doing. He had a lot of doubts that it was actually going to make sense and all come together the way that he envisioned. But it absolutely did. Critics loved it. Audience members loved it too. I imagine the audience rated it slightly lower because it's kind of polarizing. I mean, it's weird, it's different, it's not quite rooted in reality. It's fighters flying around, which is a bit strange. I love that he committed and he just absolutely sent it. Ang Lee's lowest rated film, Gemini Man. Gemini Man is that movie where they cloned Will Smith to look like a younger version of himself. It's kind of famous for that, and unfortunately not much else. Before I watched this movie, I had my suspicions that that was the case, that this movie was essentially a vehicle to showcase the CGI required to make Will Smith into a clone of his younger self. And I was mostly right. Yes, they do successfully make Will Smith look like a younger version of himself. And while this is cool, I didn't feel like the movie had a whole lot of substance otherwise. First, I'll get into a little bit of the story and how it came to be. So the script for this movie has actually been floating around since the 90s. The writers were just waiting for the right technology to come along so that they could actually accomplish the feat of creating a younger clone of the main character. And so finally, we did it. It happened. In 2019, we cloned Will Smith. And the result is kind of weird. We as humans are programmed to recognize faces to the tiniest degree. And so despite the fact that this technology is amazing and the CGI creators of this clone Will Smith should be so proud of themselves, it still looks a little bit off to a lot of the watchers. But then also, once you get past the clone thing, I kind of felt like there wasn't a whole lot of story to stand on. This movie is about an aging hitman named Henry who feels like he's losing his edge. He was the best in the biz, like the best that there was. But on his most recent assignment, he almost shoots a girl and realizes that he's not as good as he used to be. What he doesn't know is that an unsanctioned offshoot of the government has actually cloned him, and his clone is now young 20s, and his clone has been raised to be an assassin as well because they wanted assassins that could just be like weapons for the government. But now that Henry is retiring, they send his clone hitman out to get him and to kill him because they don't want to deal with a retired hitman being out on the run. It felt kind of like a play spy movie. Like, I feel like if you asked a 16-year-old boy to write a spy movie, this is what you would get. Like half the lines in the movie felt like they weren't necessary and they were just being said so that they could use the soundbite for the trailer.
If you get on this boat, you're leaving behind everything and everybody you've ever known. Do you understand that?
The character building felt very on the nose without a whole lot of interesting nuance. It felt like a lot of the stuff didn't really make sense. Like Henry is painted to be this hyper competent hitman, but he does things that just don't seem very competent. For example, he has this alarm on his phone that comes up anytime someone like goes into his yard or like approaches the perimeter. This does look very cool. This is very spy, but is so not covert. Imagine if you were just hanging out with your friends and one of your friends had that alert pop up on their phone. It would be so much more slick to use like a regular Ring camera app like anyone else. This wasn't that long ago. This was 2019. We had technology that could do things like this. It would be so much more stealthy than this obvious dummy weird little app that he like. What is this, an app? Did he design this himself? Did he download the app called Perimeter Blocked? It's just silly. This movie was peppered with things like that just felt like they did it because it was like a spy trope without thinking about whether it was a good idea or a good spy trope. As for on the nose things, the clone's name is Junior. I feel like my eyes rolled out loud. Which I get that like his adopted dad cloned him, so they named him Junior, but okay. In addition, I see that this movie was exploring themes of identity and aging and living with one's own reflection, which I know is what Ang Lee was going for. I get that, but man, did he hammer it in. There were some cool shots, and these are the ones where I see Ang Lee come through. But man, that motif on reflections and mirrors and reflections and mirrors and mirrors.
I'm finding myself avoiding mirrors lately.
There were a lot of mirrors. We get it. Another note on the weird visuals in this movie. So this movie was shot at 120 frames per second. Ang Lee chose to do this, and it was his second movie doing this. His first time that he did this was actually the first movie that ever did this. It was called Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, and it was the first movie shot in 120 frames per second. Ang Lee chose to do this because he wanted to focus on the details of the face and make the movie feel hyper-realistic. He did accomplish this, but not in the way that he wanted. People were kind of weirded out by how hyper-realistic that movie looked, to the point where they felt like they could see every little speck of makeup and the lighting felt too realistic, almost like watching a soap opera. So he took that criticism and then did it again with this movie. His reasoning for doing the 120 frames per second for this movie was that he wanted the action scenes to feel really visceral and like you were right there with them. So for background, 120 frames per second is very different from the standard in film, which is 24 or 30 frames per second. What it basically means is that for every second of video, there are 24 or 30 still frames. If you really break down what a video is, it's like a flip book of moving pictures. Literally, that's why we call it movies. They used to be way fewer frames per second, and that's why they looked all jumpy. And so if you think about it, you take 24 or 30 frames per second, multiply that to be 120 frames per second. The result is that you don't get blur when something moves really quickly because there is no break in shot that you have to make up for. You get hyper-realistic views into facial expressions and movement. Ang Lee really sees this as kind of a technological frontier that he believes we should conquer in cinema. He sees it as an opportunity rather than a barrier, and he really wants us to learn how to leverage this to its full potential. So he sees these movies as experimentations of sorts and accepts that they don't always land and that audiences aren't super used to seeing film this way, but he still sees it as an important step in film. The result in this movie was that the action felt super visceral and realistic. You didn't get as much blur when we were moving at high paces. It did kind of feel like you were right there in the action. And to his credit, the action scenes did feel more thought out and more choreographed than your standard action movie action scene. And I think that speaks super well to Ang Lee's bread and butter, the way that he puts intentionality between movement and physical interaction between characters. So yeah, this movie didn't land for me, didn't land for most critics. It did land for a lot of audiences, but I think that might have been because of the clone thing and the action being fun. So I can see why people would enjoy this as an audience member, but not Ang Lee's best work for sure. It made me wonder why Ang Lee took on this film. But when I did more research into Ang Lee, it actually started to make sense. So Ang Lee is really big into technological innovation and experimentation. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon has this amazing sequence of fighting within bamboo forests. It's one of their most famous scenes, and it took like cranes and a bunch of equipment. It was very hard to make. He also won awards for The Life of Pi, which is a movie about a boy who's stranded on a lifeboat with a tiger. And one of the acclaims of that movie is that he chose to make the tiger mostly CGI, which is really hard to pull off, and he did a really, really great job with it. He also shoots in higher frames per second and in 3D because he sees this as a technological frontier that is an opportunity for us to explore, and he did that with this movie. So in considering his perspective on technological innovation in film, it actually made sense that he took on a movie like this where we use CGI to create a younger version of a current actor. While I appreciate what he was going for, and I appreciate the bravery in trying something new like that, this one didn't really land for me. Ang Lee's most mid movie, Lust, Caution. A lot of movies that score in the 60s to 70s range get that because they're competent and not much else. A lot of the times I find them kind of boring. This movie is anything but boring. I was curled up in a sweaty ball of anxiety during the climax of this movie, like actually wishing I could look away because I couldn't stand the suspense. But I couldn't let down my more than 100 viewers, so I watched it for you guys. Lust, Caution is a movie that takes place in Japan-occupied China during World War II. It follows a young woman, Wang Chia-chi, who is a spy first for the Chinese resistance and then for China itself. Her mission is to get close to traitor Yi by way of seduction. This is an intense, steamy, and exciting spy thriller. I really enjoyed this movie, and I was surprised that this was his most mid-rated film. It's got a really rich backdrop and complex characters and relationships. Remember how I said Ang Lee is all about choreography? So that's not just for fight scenes. This movie had some very intimate and very explicit scenes to the point at which I can't show them here. But they similarly contained a lot of almost dialogue between the two characters without them actually having to say anything. However, this does have some controversial and polarizing elements that I think contributed to this score. Some of them are rough, kind of hard to watch, and some argue are unnecessarily indulgent. Another criticism of this film is that some felt that the feelings between the main characters were sort of muddied. I see what they mean. On one hand, the feelings are supposed to be sort of muddied because this is a story of espionage where a spy is infiltrating a traitor and they sort of fall in love along the way. That's confusing for the characters themselves as well as the audience. However, I feel like there were certain times where we were supposed to know how the characters were feeling, but I couldn't quite read what the scene was trying to tell me. The movie is rather long and fairly slow and intricate, but I never found it slow in a boring sense at all. It's slow in a deliberate sense. It's like this slow, tense build toward a really impactful climax. This movie has a rather atypical ending that I imagine might have also been polarizing for viewers. I thought it was really beautiful. Overall, I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was super tense, super fun to watch, really interesting, and like a really cool historical backdrop. I felt like I learned a little bit about history while watching it, but not in a boring way. It does have a few trigger warning scenes around rough, intimate scenes. So if that's something that bothers you, I would maybe do your research before you watch this movie or maybe choose not to watch it. Also, as a weird side note, I tried to get this film in the uncut version because I wanted to see the full movie as Ang Lee intended it. And so on my Roku, I clicked uncut and it took me to Apple TV and I watched it, and I learned later that there actually was a cut scene from it and it didn't tell me that the scene was cut. It's also a very intimate scene. I was surprised that they cut this one but not the other ones. I don't know why. This movie that I watched, I learned later, was 3 minutes shorter than the full movie. And unfortunately, I did miss a scene. I looked up what the scene was and how it contributes to the story. So I just wanted to call out Apple TV being sneaky. Check your run times if you really want to know whether you're getting the full uncut version of a movie or not. So overall, what did I learn? What makes an Ang Lee movie an Ang Lee movie? So the main themes that I saw throughout this were the exploration of cultural taboos and cross-cultural relationships. I felt like this was a big theme in a lot of the movies that I watched, and when I look at the rest of his filmography, I think that still really rings true. I think another aspect to Ang Lee is that he doesn't discriminate between multicultural social taboo struggles. He takes on the idea of being gay as a cowboy in Brokeback Mountain, and he takes on the idea of marrying for love and Sense and Sensibility in 1700s England. I think he's really drawn to these themes regardless of the culture or the setting in which they take place, and I think that's really cool. And throughout all the films that I watched, I feel like some of the shots felt like they looked like paintings in a really beautiful way. And I think this comes through most often in nature shots. Even in Gemini Man, which kind of had some weird visuals, it had some really great nature shots that I really appreciated. He also chooses to show things in more interesting ways than the most straightforward way to show something. I know I made fun of the mirror examples earlier, but some of those shots are actually pretty cool. They're pretty innovative. You could just show a guy shooting a guy, but he chose to do something different and symbolic, and I think that's cool, even though the movie ultimately flopped. Choreography and physical interaction between characters is huge for Ang Lee. He gets ultra expressive with hands and with tiny gestures. I think that's such a cool way to approach quasi-dialogue in a film. Also, he's big on technological innovation. He innovated not only in the movies that I watched, he innovated in Life of Pi and Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, and he doesn't shy away from big, scary projects. I love that he chose to create his movies in Chinese. This made it harder for them to do well in American markets, which is kind of the biggest market, especially in the 2000s. So that was brave and daring, but I think that was super cool, and it made the movies really unique and true to themselves and true to Ang Lee. And yeah, I love that he just goes for it. Like, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is so weird. It's like this movie where warriors fly around in ancient China and have magical powers, only sort of, but they don't even explain it. And they're chasing a legendary sword, and there's like a love story, and people are like flying off of cliffs. Like, in theory, like if you were to pitch this movie and you were just a normal person, people would think that you were insane. But luckily, Ang Lee pitched this to Michelle Yeoh, who was on board, and he made an absolute masterpiece. But while he was doing it, he has said that he didn't feel like it was all going to come together. He felt like he was just living out a weird childhood fantasy that wasn't going to make any sense. So props to him for taking risks and being daring even when it flops. I feel like I learned so much about Ang Lee just by watching these films. I didn't know much about Ang Lee before I started watching these films, but I am a converted fan. I can't wait to see what he puts out next. Yeah, go watch some Ang Lee movies. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around. I love making movies like this, and I plan to do more tops and flops because I think this was such a great way to explore a director. Also, I am not an expert. I am just somebody who likes to talk about movies, and I love an excuse to watch a new movie or learn something new about movies. So if you're like me, like and subscribe for more content like this, and stick around for more.